All right, so remember, in this first part, we're going to be trying to limit the amount of services we use. So this is going to be the kind of a bare bones basic version. The next part will go into using TRPC to be able to have a richer API system to be able to do calls and queries against our database. And so one of the first things that we can do is going into our source folder here. Let's create a features folder. We're going to do this for our auth in this example. And another folder that we're going to create subordinate to auth. And so the structure of this, sometimes you might have components, you might have hooks to allow for someone to be able to call an open modal function. So something to that effect, like open add something modal, and a modal is just a little pop-up on the screen, right? And so the main structure of that is you have your piece of code. You want to stick your modal in everywhere because you might want to reuse it. And so you might create a hook to be able to call it. And so when there are API-specific things that a modal controls, I generally put that with my different API calls. And so, hooks, components, those are potential files. In this example, I'm just going to be focusing on the function folder here. We're also going to have an API call, but we're not going to do it with auth. We're going to do it somewhere else. For now, the only function that we're really worried about is protect page. So you might have seen me use this function in different tutorials in the past. Another thing that we're going to need to do, well, let me finish one thing at a time. We're going to create our protect page. So when we think about protect page, it's that when someone navigates to a page, we're just going to call this function at the top of our function here. So whether it's in the home page here or in the login, and the reason that I did async, and let me change this to async as well, depending on, and it's actually really great that we have different examples here. We have the function components here, and we have the arrow components. This totally works with either. What we're just going to do is at the top await protect page. And there's going to be some extra things that we're going to be putting within there, and we'll go into that. But really, just at the top, right, before we even render anything on the page, we need to make sure that a user is either authorized or not, right? And so if they go to the login page, but they're actually authorized, well, then let's just transfer them to the logged in homepage. And let's say that they tried to go into the logged in homepage, but they're unauthorized, they haven't signed in. Then let's navigate us to the login page. So that's what we're going to be trying to work on here with this protect page function. We're going to be, we'll go through this kind of slow just to kind of go through some of the individual pieces. I have gone over this in probably more detail in my tutorials. So feel free to take a look at that, especially in the starting points tutorial. For this, right, we're going to be using redirect here. Works with asynchronous functions. We're going to grab auth, right? And so just as a reminder, this auth @auth is from here. We're just grabbing this method here. And so pulling that, we're going to create a function here, protect page. It's going to be an asynchronous function, and it's going to take in a couple things. And so we're going to create an interface for that. Interface protect page options. I generally like to package this one inside of an object. It's totally optional to do that because you could just write, instead of putting an object here, what we're going to put eventually, authorized URL and unauthorized, right? But I like to put it in an object just because in some cases, right, you're going to use one field or another, right? So unauthorized URL, it's going to be an optional value. So, if you have the login page, for example, and the user is authorized, you will navigate to the authorized URL that you provide to the protect page function inside a login. There is no reason to provide the unauthorized URL here, right, on the login screen, because you're already there, right? And then vice versa. If you have a landing page, which is only supposed to be there for unauthorized users, then you're going to only have a authorized URL. You're not going to have an unauthorized URL, because you don't want on that landing page for people who aren't logged in to then automatically get jumped to the login, right? You want them to be able to read whatever is on the landing page, that has all the marketing copy for your website, right? You want people to be able to look at that without having to have logged in or be automatically redirected to the login page, right? So generally, unauthorized URL, you're going to be sending someone to a login. In some cases, if you have a page where it could be public, it could be private, right? So you have some things that are available to public users on a website. Let's just say, for instance, like Zillow, right? Like if you're looking at home listings on Zillow, there might be some things that are available. Actually, let me use an example that more people may understand. I'm trying to buy my own house, so that's why Zillow's top of mind. But let's just say YouTube, right? So YouTube, there are certain features for logged in people and certain features that don't exist for people who don't have an account, right? But generally, if you play a YouTube video on YouTube, you should be able to see the same thing. But in some cases, right, the subscription page or, just some different features that are within, a public page versus a non-public page, you might want to be able to delineate that. And so that's where the unauthorized URL comes in. It's not automatically just going to punch you the login. It might punch you over to the URL that is available for unauthorized / not logged in people. So long-winded explanation there. Hopefully that makes sense to people. We're just going to pull in authorized URL and unauthorized URL. I did not want to pull in unauthorized from here. We're going to need to specify its type. So it's going to be protect page options. Did I forget something? No, that should be working. And then we need the arrow. There we go. Okay. IntelliSense was confusing me there for a little bit. What we're going to pull is const session from auth. So what auth returns here is just some type of session here. So when we await this, right, we're just evaluating the promise that we're getting from auth, right? So auth returns a promise. We need to evaluate it. We use await to be able to evaluate this promise. Because of this await, that's why this function is async and why protect page works specifically with asynchronous functions. And so you have async here, you have async here, it's going to work. If there are any client component stuff, right, just like with our GitHub login and with our Google login, we can't just have event handlers because they require client components. We can't do use client on the top and use it with async. We punted over that bit of code into its own component and kind of create like a smaller subgroup or a sub area that has been declared a client component, right? So that this can work. So now that we've grabbed the session here, we basically need to find out, because as you can see here, session can either return a session or be null. If a session exists, that means that the user is authorized, right? And so because, again, also remember that authorized URL could be undefined, we can make sure that a authorized URL exists. If it does not exist, then we return early. Otherwise, we redirect to the authorized URL. And then an else statement here, if not unauthorized URL, then we return, and we can redirect to the unauthorized URL. Cool. Honestly, technically, you could just, do this, right? Either one works. No, actually, you can't do that. The reason for that is, I believe, it's because of how redirect work. Redirect will continue, and so you'll evaluate with the if. And so you need to have this else. I believe that's how that works. That's why I didn't do this in my sample code and in most of my other code. This is the general structure on how I do it. So let's not mess with perfection. Protect page here, so we're just going to pull that in. We'll move it with all of our @ and put it in ABC order. Just slide that in there. So protect page. We're going to provide an object here. And from the login screen, if a user is authorized, we'll just take them to /home. And then we don't need to do anything with unauthorized URL. If we somehow added unauthorized URL to our login page, well, that would be kind of weird because it would just keep flip-flopping back and forth from login page. You'll never be able to actually log in, right? So we want to make sure that we don't have unauthorized URL there. And let's just say on our home page here, right? I'm going to do await protect page here and say that unauthorized URL, go to login, right? So if the user is not allowed and they somehow get to this page here, and I'm not going to call this home anymore. I'm going to call this landing just to make a big key delineation because we're going to add in a home page here, create just a sample page.tsx here, const home page. Whoops, I should make this asynchronous. Async here, await, protect, page here, unauthorized. We'll go back to login, and then just return, return a div with homepage. Thank you, Copilot. So we put those 2 semicolons there, and remember to export default home page. Cool. So that should go there, and then, if it's authorized, right, then let's just take us to home. Right, so you can kind of see the relationship between these 3 different files. So, hey, this, actually, don't go to the login page because, as I explained for a long time earlier, you want the user to be able to see the things on the landing page, and so we're not going to automatically redirect there to the login. Of course, also, if you had the unauthorized URL that went somewhere, well, then we would just be flip-flopping back and forth in that case because this would go to login. The login would go back to probably this / page. Mistakes I've made in the past unwittingly. But in this case, you can see, and let me just do this in order, right? You have this app, you hit the login, you go to login, right? You use either your Google or your GitHub login, you get to the home page. If I was unauthorized and I made it to the home page, well, I'm not supposed to be there. Before I render anything, I trigger this protect page that I'm unauthorized, and then that will navigate me over to login, right? And since I don't have an unauthorized URL here, I don't go anywhere, and I can try to log in. And if I am authorized, this is the opposite example, and I make it onto the landing page, right? Well, there is a user session, and so, or a possible user session. So we're going to go to the authorized URL, which is home. And since we are authorized, we stay here. So we're able to see this home page text. So cool. That's how protect page works. So we have all of our bits here. We're just going to clear down real quick, collapse everything. So that's a pretty basic example. It didn't really require us making an API call or some form of, hook call for information. So one of the pieces of information, if you remember from our database, and I can show it within the schema here, right, is user information, right? And so technically within sessions, you could pull it because you have within protect page here. Let's see, actually, let me just go back there real quick. Where did I go? Here it is. Within the sessions, and if I just console.log session dot, you can see that the user is already there. I'm just going to pretend that we don't want to grab it from there, but just as an example of us being able to pull or show an example of us pulling data from the database. So there's an easier way to do this. I'm just using this as a easy example to show that we can pull the user information from our Neon database. And just as a reminder here, I pulled up the Neon console real quick. This is what we're pulling, right? So from the Neon database, we're grabbing ID, name, email verified image. These are just connections to different tables. These are the actual pieces of data that we're going to be trying to retrieve. So we don't have any users yet because we haven't actually logged in for the first time. But once we log in, we're going to be able to want to pull, for example, the name, email, and just display it to the screen as a point of example here. All right, so how do we do that? So inside of features here, we're just going to add in real quick an additional feature. So we're going to grab user information. That's what I just explained, right? And we're going to have an API folder where we're going to be able to call it. We are going to need to wrap things inside of a safe way to be able to grab this API information. You could just use raw Drizzle calls, but generally it's better if we just package everything into the same function and we call it the same way. One of the ways that we can do that inside of this library folder, we're just going to create a function here, create safe actions. So the reason I don't put it within features is because all of the features are potentially going to be using this, and so it would make sense to stick it somewhere within there. So instead of just putting it in a general library folder, and actually really this create safe action function is going to be called within files that are within app, so they're not even going to be called in features. I don't believe. Let me check just to make sure. Oh, no, never mind. We are going to be calling these in functions. So honestly, you could move it within here and just have that, but I'll just put it in library for now. What we're going to be doing with creating safe actions, right? Meaning that we have a structured way that is type safe how we can call these API calls, so that we aren't just doing raw, Drizzle calls and potentially calling things incorrectly and then being like, oh my god, where is the API call failing and all that type of stuff. One less thing to worry about if we don't need to worry about type safety. Oh, I inputted something wrong, because it's going to display an error immediately when you call the action. So what we're going to do here is first import Zod, which provides our type safety. So let's see if we have Zod. We do have Zod installed. What we're going to do is use some templates to basically make this extensible for any different type of data field. So we're going to do export type field errors of a certain type, and for k in key of that template, we're going to have an array of strings. So we're just going to have a list of potential errors, right? Something pretty simple there. Then we're going to specify some form of action state where we specify, hey, this is the templated input, and we're going to have a templated output, right? So t input, t output here. We're going to have data of some form type output. So whatever we expect, that's going to be returned as data. Or we could potentially have the error, which could be of string, or, hey, there's no error. Great. So we're going to have that as type null. And then we're going to have field errors as well. So this is a way for us, if we have inputs or some sort of component that requires field errors, we're going to be able to provide that. So t input there. Cool. We're going to do export const create safe action. We're gonna have t input, t input, t output. Autocorrect going wild there. We're gonna need to specify some form of schema, which is with our Zod schema of t input, and actually to put it in ABC order, we're gonna have handler here be of some form of validated data, so making sure that whatever we're passing in is of the correct type, which will be of t input. Did I forget anything else? Oh, so this handler will be returning a promise. And let me just separate this out so it looks better. Promise of action state here. Cool. Comma. And then, whoops, forget the arrow function here. In fact, we just returned something, so we're going to use parentheses instead of curly braces. An asynchronous function here. Data, colon, t input, which will return the promise of action state t input, t output. We're going to have some form of validated result, and that'll be from the schema that we provide. We're going to safe parse it, make sure that everything looks right. If things don't look like, we're going to need our field errors. So we're going to return field errors, validation, whoops, validated result dot error dot flatten field errors as field errors of type t input. Cool. Otherwise, we're going to return the handler and provide our validated result dot data. Awesome. Cool. So we're going to semicolon there, and let's see what's wrong with action state. Oh, it's because I did not provide the t input. Whoops, sorry, what was it? Yeah, t input. Oh my gosh, come on. T input, t output. Let's see what is wrong here. Let me check to make sure I didn't forget anything. Oh, I forgot one of the error. Yep, there we go. Cool. Whew. All right, there is the safe action here. Honestly, we could shrink this a little bit more by just doing this, but whatever. That works too. Cool. So now we have a safe action. So how we do the user call. So what we can do is inside of this API here, we can create something called get user. And that's just going to be specifying the action that we're going to have here. And we're going to be using the name get user. So we'll have an index.ts. And so basically we can just return get user as import get user as something. This just makes the import URL look cleaner. We're going to also specify a schema, and we're going to specify a type. So let's start with the schema first. So it's going to be pretty basic. We're just going to use Zod here. Z from Zod. Export const get user, which is equal to z dot object, and the thing that we're going to need to use to grab the user is the user's ID. So z dot string. Fun. Cool. For the types, we're going to do Zod So we're specifying the input and return types here. So the t input, t output. So we're going to import action state from the file that we just created here. We are going to import user from @/db schema. We're going to import get user from /schema. Export type input type is equal to z.infer type of get user. So you can see there, we've just created a simple type of this user ID that we can pass in. Export type, return type, or technically you could do output type if you'd like. Either way works. I'm just going to use output type here, z.infer. Whoops, not infer. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Action state here of the input type, and then users. Let's see. Right. We're going to need type of users, but not exactly that. Users dot infer select. Right. So when we do that, this type of infer select, we're grabbing all of this piece of information and saying the type of this. Right. So that way, let me see if I can show that. Yeah, there we go. See on this data here, that's basically we're specifying the type here. If I didn't do this infer select, right, the data would be this weird PG tables with columns. So when I do infer select here, you can see we have the actual object or undefined, because potentially the user that is being specified with the input type, which is user ID, could potentially not exist. So in that case, we return undefined. Cool. Awesome. Now we have our index. And so this is probably going to be the more complicated part, but thankfully we've chosen a really simple example. So we're going to create a handler, right? So remember, inside of our safe action, we have our schema already over here, but we need our handler. So we're going to create the handler part now. Data of type input type, which is going to be grabbed from /type. Make sure that you don't take input type from somewhere else. We're going to be returning a promise of output type and provide an arrow function here. Right. So what we're going to do is, look, we can do just const user is equal to await or await auth, right, and just grab it like that. But just for this example, we're going to do it with the Drizzle database query. So what we're going to do is user is equal to await db dot query dot we need to pull in db real quick, just so you can see all the different fields here. So db dot, there's a bunch of stuff within here, all the different actions that are available within Drizzle. The one that we want here is query. And we need to specify which table. So within our schema, whoops, not the schema, but the Drizzle schema, we have a bunch of different tables that we have defined, right? Just taken from their example, but you can see them all here. So we want the users one. We're going to pull from that one, and we are going to call find first from that. And how do we find first here? We're going to do where equals, and that's a function that's provided from Drizzle ORM. So basically just provides equality between two passed in parameters. So we're going to do, we're going to call in users from @/db schema. We're going to use the ID and see if it matches our data.user ID. Great. Now, let's see if not user, then we need to return an error, user not found. So that satisfies one part of the potential outputs, but the error that's coming up here is that, hey, you're expecting a return statement that looks like this, but you're not actually returning it. That's right, we need to return data, which will have user. Cool. And so now we've properly satisfied everything, and you can see here within this, we've grabbed all of these different pieces, right? Technically, in our output type, we did specify that it could be undefined, but you know, that'll be more down to a failure to retrieve from the database, like an issue with the actual API call, as opposed to something that's being triggered within this handler. So great. Now we can put it all together and do export const get user is equal to create safe action. Whoops. We're going to provide in our handler that we specified there and our input, our schema, which will be get user. So you might have noticed I used different capitalization just so that we don't have a clash between this get user and this get user. This get user, you know, a schema, it's an object, right? So kind of makes a little bit more sense that we can capitalize that part of it. You know, handler, user, they're all functions. And so, you know, putting it in this format looks a little bit better for me. So cool. Next step, we're going to start using it. All right, so before we can properly use the action that we created, we need to properly configure our authorization, which includes getting the API keys. Now, I've done this a lot of times, so I'm just going to replay real quick the flow to be able to pull the API keys, the secret key and the public key from both GitHub and Google. You can also look back at my old tutorials if you want to learn more about JWT tokens, but for this tutorial, you know, we're just going to take a look back, get Google, GitHub set up. We're going to move forward with just logging in on Google and then testing out the API call, right, and also showing that authorization flow from beginning to end works. So I'm going to play this video, so feel free to skip over this chapter if you're totally cool with being able to set that up yourself, or if you've already set that up with one of my tutorials in the past, thank you for watching one of the past tutorials. You can skip over to the next one, to the next chapter, and see you in a bit. Alrighty, so once we're done with all of the environment variables, making sure that we have Google and GitHub all properly set up, let's go into our homepage here and actually use the action that we created. So what we're going to do is below this, we're going to grab const and just remember the format of what the return type is going to be, this output type, right? So we're going to pull data, and data is going to be of either this object or undefined if it doesn't, if there was some form of a problem with the API call. We already vetted out the fact that user is not going to be undefined with this conditional check right here. We're going to return an error if there's a problem. So we're going to do here, we're going to do data and alias it to user. We can also grab error if need be, and grab await get user. So remember to grab that from @features user /API there. And then, you know, yeah, sure, we can provide this user ID. Make sure this is that little type safety here. Number is not assignable to string, so put the quotes. It's now a string. This is obviously going to return a user not found because, you know, we're using, or underneath the hood, I think it uses some form of UUID or whatever Google is actually using. I guess I don't know what Google is using. Maybe if you know, comment in the comments down below. But, you know, whatever they're using for that, I assume that I'm not user ID number 1. So this is going to return an error, but we can either, I guess, console. Actually, you know what? if, what we can do is just have if error, then we're going to render something different, right? And we're just going to say error, right? And then homepage if it's successful, which will just copy the ID from the database. Sorry, possibly undefined. A little question mark there to be able to pull that. But, you know, just based off of the types here, you can tell that if everything in the backend and we've configured everything correctly, user is going to be returning all the information from our Neon database table, the ID, name, email, whether or not the email is verified, and the URL that corresponds to the user's profile picture, their image. We're just grabbing a name from there. We could grab more, email, etc., but just doing the name here. And then obviously for error, it's a string, null or undefined, doesn't really matter, right? If there is an error, right, that's going to be error is a string, then we're going to just render error with the little error there. Cool. Let's hop over to the localhost 3000, which can be done with npm run dev, and take a look at our authorization flow. Okay, so everything seems to be functioning correctly so far within the localhost. So what we're going to do here, hit our login, which will navigate us to the login. A little big there. We have our little login card that we created here, and let's just use, for the sake of this tutorial, real easy, Google. We're just going to go in, log in with my personal email here, and we're going to see error, user not found. Remember, I said that was going to happen because my user ID does not match this number 1. I'm probably going to have to hide this in post because I don't know if that's actually a bad thing to show what my user ID actually is. But, whoops, let me just grab this straight from Neon. So, scary black box here in a second, popping on the screen here. That's my actual user ID hidden. And so if we go into this, right, we can see homepage, my name. Sick. Everything works. We're able to pull the information straight from there, right? And if we're looking at email, right, there's my personal email. Everything looks good. Backend works. Woo! Love it. So great. We have our backend example. You can start creating additional stuff, start adding more Postgres tables to your schema, be able to use the same actions format between being able to create, index, schema, type, using the create safe actions function to be able to create easy queries to our database in a safe way, right? Wonderful. So hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. Going fast in some particular areas, slower in others, right? This was a very basic, easy example to just get your feet wet. Next episode, we're going to look into TRPC, which is totally different, lots of setup, very tedious. So look, this is probably good for 99% of MVPs to be able to get your product out there. Probably not the most scalable way to be able to do this, but in just being able to test out an idea or get some customer feedback, first initial few customers, totally acceptable to be able to do to use this. So big shout out to Coding with Antonio. He's one of the channels that I watch to basically get a handle on this type of stuff. A lot of this bits of code adapted from one of his earlier tutorials. I know that he's moved on from it, but this serves as a really good basic starting point with how to use a basic backend to be able to pull stuff from a database. So I've kind of adapted it a little bit from him. Another one, right, Codecademy, great resource to be able to learn about React in general, which is where I initially learned a bit about React beyond using it for a little bit in college, but shout out to those resources. I'll put those in the link in the description. Hope you enjoy these tutorials. Let me know in the comments down below what other tutorials or explainer videos that you'd like to see. Hopefully you enjoy having me in the corner here. Hopefully not too obstructive. But yeah, excited to be doing a lot more content. And, just remember, if G can build, so can you. Go out there, build a lot of cool stuff. Share it in the comments down below. And until next time, thanks for watching.